Hello BookTube, Sarah here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my weekly reviews, for June the 8th through the 14th of 2019. So I finished 7 books this week, and according to Goodreads, I think I'm on track for getting my 365 books read this year. I mean, I think last week I finished 7 books as well, so it just makes sense. You know, if you're finishing about 7 books a week, you're going to stay on track for a book a day for the year. So as per usual in this video, essentially all this is going to be are mini reviews of all the books that I've read this week. And if you are interested in only hearing about certain books, I do have timestamps in the description box below. So if you want to jump ahead to hear about a certain book or what have you, feel free to jump around in the video and use those timestamps. So yeah, let's get started. So the first book that I finished this week was A Creed in Stone Creek by Linda Lael Miller. This is a contemporary romance novel, book number 5 in the Montana Creeds series, narrated on audio by Jack Garrett. This was published in 2010. Average rating of 4.05 stars on Goodreads. I gave it 3.5 stars. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. Linda Lael Miller does some really awesome books. Now, the thing with this one is that even though it is book 5 in the Montana Creeds series, this is a 7-book series in total, but it almost can be read like one series, a middle book, and then another series in a way. Other than the fact that our main characters are Creeds, there is really no connection to the first 3 books, which were Dylan, Tyler, and Logan. I don't think that's the order that they go in, but those were the first 3 books. And then we got the A Creed Country Christmas, which was actually a historical novel about those 3 boys, those first 3 characters, or men, I should say. Their great-grandfather, I think, his love story, and then now we're jumping to cousins, and these books actually take place in Arizona, where the first 3 books took place, of course, or first 4 books, I should say, took place in Montana. So you could almost read these last 3 books, 5, 6, and 7, as a completely separate series. Now, from what I've understood after looking at reviews on Goodreads after reading it, is that this book also ties in together with her Stone Creek series. So you are meeting characters in this book that you would have met in the Stone Creek series. Now, I have not read that series yet, but I was in no way lost. I mean, you're meeting a lot of people in town. A lot of people seem to be paired up. So I'm assuming that those are the characters from that other series. So anyway, this story is about a man by the name of Stephen, and her name is Melissa. And Stephen comes to town. He used to live in Denver, Colorado, and he was a lawyer, and he sold his practice. And he has taken on custody of his best friend's little boy. The little boy is adorable, and he's trying to give him a stable home environment. Both of the little boy's parents were killed in an accident, and he was given custody. So he comes back to town and he meets Melissa, and Melissa she's lived in this small town called Stone Creek, Arizona her entire life, and the two of them kind of develop a friendship and start kind of seeing each other. Well, underlying all of this, and this is what kind of got me, from reading the back of the book, you find this out, that there's a troublemaker in town. He was just recently released from prison, and I won't get into what that whole story is and why he was in prison and things like that. But things are starting to happen around town, and, you know, then this person ends up getting charged with a very vicious robbery of a convenience store. So Melissa is a lawyer as well, and she ends up being like, I'm not too sure exactly how the American system works, as opposed to I want to say she's working for the Crown, because that's the Canadian thing to say. But I'm thinking like Law and Order. She works for no, it wouldn't be the prosecution, would it? Anyway, she is on the side of the law, essentially, and she is against him in court, this person who's being charged, whereas Stephen is actually defending him in court. And so the two of them are kind of going head to head. Now, on the back of the book, it talks about this, so you assume that this is going to be a good bulk of the story. That part of it actually didn't start taking place until well after the halfway point of the book. So, which kind of bugs me when they put that in, you know, the back of the book to say that this is what's going to happen, and it doesn't happen until ways into the story. So regardless of that fact, and It really wasn't anything that huge or massive, but you know, that kind of becomes the apex and the major thing that kind of drives them apart before they come back together, which is always the way that romances work. You know, they do, to be completely honest, almost every romance novel has a specific plot line that kind of is followed. The characters meet, they start seeing each other, they're really starting to fall for each other, then something big drives them apart, and then they come back together again. That's generally, you know, the plot line for a romance novel. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this one, 3.5 stars. This is a fun series. I liked the first 3 books. Logan, Tyler, and Dylan were great stories. But in this one, you also meet Stephen's 2 cousins, and their stories will be the last 2 stories in this series. So I'm looking forward to getting to those later this year, because this is part of my Stacking the Series challenge, is to finish this series. So the next book that I read was The Driven Snow by Cathy Yardley. Hold on one second, I got it right here in front of me. This is of course, contemporary romance novel. It's Harlequin Blaze number 14, originally published in 2001. 3.20 stars on Goodreads. I gave it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy this one. So this was part of my 40 Years of Harlequin project, and this is the story of Angela and Josh. In the beginning of the story, Angela propositions Josh in a bar. He's kind of known around town as being like the playboy. He doesn't stick with one woman. He's constantly taking women home. He stays with them for like a few months and then moves on to the next woman, that kind of a person. And of course, this is a Harlequin Blaze, so it is going to be a lot spicier than a typical Harlequin category romance novel. And she propositions him because she is almost 30 years old and she's still a virgin. And she has received, or thought she received, a very scary medical diagnosis that they found. She found a lump in her breast, and she is waiting on the results back to find out if it's cancer or not. But she has a history of breast cancer in her family. So needless to say, she's a little bit extra concerned about that. And there's a bunch of things that she still wanted to do, and she thought she had time, you know? And I think it's a plot line that a lot of people can appreciate. No matter how old you are, if you get some sort of a diagnosis that is life-changing, you do begin to think of the things that you didn't do, you know? I've always wanted to go to Egypt, or I've always wanted to travel to Hawaii, or I always wanted to ride that roller coaster, or whatever it might be, you know? I always wanted to go, you know, and have dinner at that very expensive restaurant, or it can be something mundane, or even as readers, you know, if I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, it would be like, I always wanted to read those, you know, my entire TBR before something happens. So I need to live to be about 305 in order to do that. But that's what I really appreciate about this, is that I think it's something that a lot of people could relate to, whether personally or whether they know somebody who's gone through it, whether a friend or family member. So she only wanted this one night stand, and just to kind of check that off her bucket list, if you will. And of course, Josh has kind of really fallen for her. And I do like the switcheroo in a way, with where romance novels would usually fall, whereas he's like, yeah, one and done, I'm good, thanks very much, and she's the one who's kind of fighting for the relationship, whereas it's the opposite in this case, that, you know, she wants to, you know, still go and do a bunch of things, and I don't want to give away too much. I mean, you find out right at the beginning that everything's okay, that she's okay, but it's still a scare, right? And she still wants to kind of live her best life in a way, or live, you know, like do these things on her bucket list, and he's kind of fighting for a relationship, and she feels that that relationship is going to drag her down, and that she, you know, won't be able to do all these things if she's with somebody. So yeah, it was a really cute story. I did actually really enjoy it. Again, very hot and spicy, a lot of adult content in here, but I really liked the message of this book, and I thought it was a really fun read. The next book that I finished was Hope Flames by Jaci Burton. This is another contemporary romance. It was the week of contemporary romance, you guys. Much like last week was too as well. This is the first book in the Hope series, and this was narrated on audio by Saskia Mallery, published in 2014. 3.84 star rating on Goodreads. I gave this one 4 stars. This was my first Jaci Burton, which is surprising because she is a very prolific romance author. And this is one that I did for the Romanceopoly, which is hosted by the girls over at the Under the Cover book blog and Jess from Peace Love Books. I will link to that website in the description box below. And, excuse me. And this was, I can't remember what category. I think this was for the small town category. When I do the little montage of images at the end of this video, it will say I do have a little, I put a little extra image in those images to say if it's for like the Summer Romance Book Bingo, or for the the romanceopoly. So it will be there. It's something small town, I think. So anyway, this is the story of Emma and Luke. And Emma has just moved back to town. She lives, it's small town, the town's called Hope. And I believe it's in Oklahoma. And she has come back after getting her license to be a veterinarian. And on her first day, Luke walks in with his dog named Boomer. Is it the dog's name Boomer? I don't think, Boomer. Yeah, I did write it down. And the dog was injured after chasing after a suspect. So, you know, Emma kind of, you know, nurses the dog back to health. He's kind of sprained his ankle, and, you know, she sends them on their merry way. And Luke can't kind of get Emma out of his head because he thinks she's really pretty and he thinks about asking her out. But he's another one with a track record of going through a lot of women. He was married at one point and divorced, and, you know, now he's just kind of, you know, he doesn't want to tie himself down to one person. And Emma's just back in town. You know, she's just opened this vet practice. She really wants to stand on her own 2 feet. One of my whole issues with this book was the fact that I can appreciate that Emma wanted to be independent and Emma wanted to do her own thing, but it got a little bit ridiculous at some points about not asking for help. Like, I don't want to get too much into the story because you begin finding out things about Emma's past and that she was hurt pretty badly by this guy. And she needs some help towards the end of the book. She's in a dangerous situation, let's put it that way. And she gets mad at Luke because he's a police officer for coming to her rescue. She could have been killed. I mean, there's a certain point where you need to stop trying to be so independent and ask for help. And I think Emma sometimes crossed that line, that she went a little bit too far. She, you know, opening this vet practice, she would get mad at her mother for trying to help her with marketing ideas. Well, that's what her mother does. You know, if you're just starting a new business, you're going to take any help that you can get to drive in business. And she's like, no, I want to do it all by myself and blah, blah, blah. And it was a little bit ridiculous, I found, at some points. But the relationship between Emma and Luke was a slow burn. It was a lot of fun. It did get hot and spicy once they got to that point. But they were a really cute couple, and I did really, really enjoy this book. And I'm very much looking forward to reading the rest of the series. The next book that I finished was The Summer of Sunshine and Margot by Susan Mallery. This was a contemporary romance, women's fiction, chick lit, whatever you want to call it. Published in 2019. This was a brand new release. It came out on the 11th of June. Average rating on Goodreads of 4.26 stars. I gave it 3.5 stars. I have to admit, you guys, I was a little disappointed in this book. And I don't know about all of you, but I know with me that if there's an author that I absolutely love, and Susan Mallery would absolutely fall into this line, Kristen Higgins, Susan Wiggs, there are some of these authors that I just expect, because I've loved all of their books, that I almost hold them to a higher rating than an author who might be new. Like, for example, Jaci Burton. You know, that was my first Jaci Burton book. I'm not going to hold that to the same, because I don't know that author and I don't know yet what she's capable of. I haven't read enough of her work, that I rate authors that I truly love and have read most of their backlist, that I almost rate them at a different level. Does that make sense? That this book, if I had never read Susan Mallery before, and didn't know what she was able to do and what kind of stories she could create and characters she could create, you know, this book probably would have gotten a 4.5 star rating from me. But because it's a Susan Mallery and I know what she can do, this one only got a 3.5 star. So the plot of this story is, and obviously I'm out of the loop on this one because this does have quite a high star rating on Goodreads at 4.26 stars. So a lot of people really, really did enjoy it. This is just my take on it, as, you know, that's why I'm here giving you guys a review. So anyway, this is the story of Sunshine and Margot, and they are a set of fraternal twin sisters living in Southern California near the Pasadena area. And it says the Summer of Sunshine and Margot, but it doesn't take place during the summer. It actually takes place before the summer. So, you know, as per usual with a set of twins, you see this in all kinds of books. I mean, Sweet Valley High did this, you know, they kind of created this whole twin, good twin, bad twin, or, you know, I don't want to say good and bad because I'm not saying that Sunshine and Margot are good and bad twins, but Sunshine tends to be the flightier twin, you know, she can't stick with one thing, she didn't go to college, you know, whereas Margot was the more studious twin and she went to college and she got this great job, but both of them are having trouble with men and it's like a family curse. And Sunshine decides she's going to finally buckle down, and, you know, she has a habit of, she'd get a nanny job, and then she would stay with them for a little while, then she'd meet a guy, and she'd go and just leave with him. And she vows never not to do that anymore. So she's got this nanny gig, and she's also going back to college, which kudos on her. I think that's awesome. And so essentially it's how her relationship goes with the single father of this little boy. And the little boy in this story was just absolutely adorable. And then there's Margot. And Margot has this job. I didn't know this was like an actual type of job, but she trains people how to act in certain situations. For example, like if you are trying to be a politician and you need to learn how to, you know, speak to the public, or, you know, you are now going to be meeting somebody very famous on which fork to use at the dinner table, or things like that. And also stuff about foreign countries. Like if, again, I'll use the politician example. You are a politician and you're going to be going to France. You want to learn about France and customs in France and stuff like that. And that's what Margot's job is. But what she's doing is she's training this very, very well-known actress, an older woman who has a full-grown son who's right around Margot's age. And she's been really flighty her whole life. She's an actress. She's kind of that head in the clouds kind of a character. Her name's Bianca. She was fun. I did like her quite a bit. She had her moments, though, that kind of drove me a little crazy, but regardless. And so she's training Margot because, not Margot, Bianca, because Bianca's going to be marrying. She's engaged to this very wealthy dignitary, and, you know, he is the ruler of a very small country, and she needs to learn how to act in a certain manner as now a member of the royal family, essentially, right? I have to think, is this what Meghan Markle had to go through when she married Prince Harry? You know, stuff like that. But anyway, so that's, and then of course, Margot ends up having a relationship with Bianca's son, Alec. So that's the main plot of the story. Outside of that, not much else happens, you guys. And I think that was part of my disappointment in this, is that the story kind of fell flat for me. I mean, it would go back and forth between Margot and Sunshine. And, you know, while their stories were interesting, of course, you know, there was a reason that both stories were put together, because they didn't have the merit to stand on their own. It wouldn't have been a full-length novel on its own. The other thing that really threw me off on this one was the adult content. Sex is mentioned in this book at least every chapter. If they're not doing it, they're talking about it. And it just didn't seem like Susan Mallery to me. That's not the way she writes. I just, and I'm not saying that she shies away from it, that you don't get those adult scenes in Susan Mallery books, because you absolutely do. But it just, something about it just didn't feel like her. I almost feel like the publisher or her editor or something said, you know, books are now becoming more adult, that maybe you need to add it in a bit more. Does that make sense? And then reading reviews after, I mean, I had to scroll through a lot of reviews to find anybody who even rated this below a 4-star. To find other people who had written it, who had rated it like 3 stars or 2 stars, to say, and they said the same thing, that even the love scenes in this book didn't read like a Susan Mallery love scene. They read, I want to use the term dirtier. Does that make sense? And I'm not saying I don't like that. You guys know I have no problem with that kind of things in books. But when I'm opening a Susan Mallery book, that's not what I'm expecting. Susan Mallery's the kind of author that I could hand that book to my mother. Or I have an older coworker who's like, you know, in her 60s. And I can say, hey, read this. You're going to really like it. And even though there are those adult scenes in there, they're nothing that's overtly graphic that's going to, you know, that those people who are of a different generation can still appreciate. And I'm not saying that people who are in their 60s and 70s can't appreciate a very good spicy book, but I think you guys understand what I'm trying to say. And I feel like this is a book I couldn't hand my mother or hand my friend Lisa. And I mean, she even was asking me about it because she saw it at Walmart. And I told her my straight up thoughts on it. I said, this is my take on it. And I said, read it for yourself and see what you think. But, you know, like this was not Susan Mallery to me. So anyway, that's really all I want to say on that book. I did like it. I mean, it was a Susan Mallery. It was a great beach read. If you want a book that you can shove in your beach bag and you're going to the pool, or you're going to the beach, or you're going on a family trip, take it with you. It's highly entertaining. It was very enjoyable. It's just, again, as I said at the beginning, I rate Susan Mallery on a different level than a lot of other authors, and this one just wasn't one of her best, in my opinion. The next book that I finished was The Sweetest Seduction by Crista McHugh. This is a contemporary romance novel, book number 1 in the Kelly Brothers series. This was originally published in 2013, average rating of 3.78 stars on Goodreads. I only gave this one 3 stars. I really don't have a lot to say about this book. It was relatively short. It was a little bit, sorry, Garrett and Gorn are having a disagreement. Sorry about that. You guys know these are what they are. This is real life, people. So yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this book. I mean, this was a very unmemorable book, if I can put it that way. It comes in at just under 200 pages, and right from the get-go, this is pretty much all about the physical relationship. What are our main characters' names? Leah and Adam. So Leah is a very, very successful restaurateur. She's a chef. She owns her own restaurant. This takes place in Chicago. At the beginning of the book, she meets Adam. And Adam is a real estate agent, or a real estate mogul, I should say. And unbeknownst to either of them, he owns the building that her restaurant is in. And he actually is breaking her lease, or wants to, like, her lease is due to expire in a few months. And he's going to pretty much kick her out, but he doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know that this is her when they first met, because he's bringing in a very, very well-known, world-renowned chef to open his own restaurant and what have you. So the two of them end up meeting, and of course, right away, the sparks fly, and they end up having an adult encounter, if you will. And then the next day, he shows up at her restaurant to pretty much tell her, hey, your lease is being, not renewed. And he realizes it's Leah. So then, of course, the story goes from there, of the two of them butting heads. But of course, a lot of, they just can't keep their hands off of each other, but they hate each other, that kind of a story. Again, I mean, it was fine. It was entertaining. It was under 200 pages. I'm pretty sure it's free for the Kindle if you're interested in reading it. This is the first in an 8-book series. So each of the next 7 books follow one of the other brothers. So there are 7 brothers in total, and then the last story is a novella, because it's under 100 pages, and it's about the brothers' parents. So, I mean, will I continue on? It wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't, and extremely memorable. It was one of those stories, one of those romances where I'm like, I read this before. Like, this is nothing new. It's not breaking any new ground. Very, very hot and spicy. So if you like that kind of thing, definitely check it out. And like I said, I'm pretty sure it is free for the Kindle. So if you're interested, give it a check out. The next book that I finished was Meet Cute by Helena Hunting. So this was not on my, and the Sweetest Seduction was also part of the Romanceopoly. I believe that one was for Subway, which was you had to read a foodie romance. And of course it worked because she was a chef. Anyway, so I read Meet Cute by Helena Hunting, another contemporary romance novel. This was narrated on audio by Holly Warren and Teddy Hamilton. This was just published this year in 2019. Average rating of 3.85 stars on Goodreads. I give it 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed this one. This was on my anticipated reads earlier this year of a book that I really wanted to read because I love that cover. I mentioned this in a previous video, but I do plan on doing kind of like a year-end wrap-up, and one of the categories will be favorite covers. I have a feeling this one will definitely make that list. I just think it's absolutely adorable. And I had heard a lot of mixed reviews about this book, actually more bad than good, because a lot of people were saying this was not what they expected going in. You look at that cover and you think this is going to be an adorable beach read, very light, very fluffy, and it wasn't. I will tell you, it wasn't, but it was still fantastic. So again, I was reading some more reviews after I finished reading the book, and a lot of people were saying this was not what they were expecting from Helena Hunting. This is the first Helena Hunting I've ever read, so I think that's why I was able to go into it with a bit of a more open mind, that I wasn't expecting something else. So much like I was saying about the Susan Mallery book, because I've read her entire back catalog, I expected more. But, in this case, it's the opposite, that so many people have read her other series. And it seems to me like she writes some very, very spicy adult content books, whereas this was quite a departure for her. I'm assuming. If you have read a lot of Helena Hunting, please do correct me if I'm wrong. So, but from the looks of it and the titles of her other books, I'm assuming as much. And not saying that those are probably not good books, they just kind of tend to be more spicy than this one was. This one did have adult content in it, but not a lot. I've read books with a lot more. So the plot of the story is about a woman by the name of Kaylin and Dax. I kept thinking Dax Shepard throughout the entire book. But anyway, the two of them met in law school when they were at UCLA, I think, when they were, about 8 years prior to the story beginning. And it was as they're calling it, a meet cute moment, where he pretty much hits her with a frisbee. And, then they end up being in the same class together. But the thing is that Dax used to be on a television show when he was a teenager. A very, very well known, he was quite a famous child actor, or teenage actor, if you will. And the show, from the sounds of it, sounded like a 90210 type of a show, but maybe a little bit younger, maybe more Saved by the Bell, if you will. So anyway, she fangirled because she was a huge fan of the show, huge fan of him, and just gushed over the fact that she was meeting him. So they kind of spent a lot of time together in law school. They would debate against each other. They'd work on projects together. And then something happens and she ends up very, very angry at him. And she kind of holds on to that anger for a good long time. And then they end up meeting, was it 8 years or 5 years? It was a certain time period later that his parents actually come into the firm, the lawyer firm that she's working for, because she is a trust lawyer, and they wanted to deal with the trust for Dax's younger sister, M. And then his parents are killed in a car accident, and Dax gets sole custody of his 13-year-old sister. And Kaylin is kind of there as an intermediate, that she is going to look after the best welfare of the child, because Dax's Aunt Linda has come in and is saying that up until 6 months ago, she was supposed to be the one taking control or getting custody of the girl, along with her very substantial trust. And now that has been handed to Dax, and she's pretty much suing him for custody of this little girl. And that is the plot of the story. Now, even me just telling you that right here and now, you know something's up. Like, at least I did. As soon as I read that, you know, this Linda character didn't seem to be on the up and up, I'm like, yeah, this is going to be the twist, if you will. It's so blatant. It's like a giant stop sign. Like, and I read that from a lot of people. There was no surprise in that aspect. But this was still a really good story. I really liked the little girl. I really liked M. She's a 13-year-old teenager. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that happens to her, it's very upsetting for her for losing both of her parents at such a young age. And yeah, I just really, really like this book. You know, like, I'm very much of the mind frame where you hear, because I watch so much BookTube and because I read so much about books, that you are going to hear things about books and be like, oh, I didn't like that one. I thought it was horrible. But judge for yourself. I mean, any of these books that I've talked about here that I've said, yeah, I might have a problem with this or this, judge it for yourself. I've always been big on that. You know, if you've heard a lot of mixed reviews about this one, but you still really want to read it, go and read it, because I enjoyed it. I mean, you know, if you don't like it, it's just a book. You can close it and you can go on to the next book. No harm, no foul. You know what I mean? But yeah, I thought this one was really, really adorable, and I really did enjoy it. And then the last book that I just finished yesterday was Wyoming, Cowboy Sniper by Nicole Helm. This is a romantic suspense novel, the only non-contemporary romance that I read, even though it is a contemporary romance of sorts. Book number 2 in the Carsons and Delaney's Battle-Tested series. This is Harlequin Intrigue number 1854, published in 2019. I think this one came out in April. And this one has an average rating of 4.30 stars on Goodreads. I only gave it 3.5 stars. Now, my issue with this story was that I felt like I was late to the party. So there is another series that Nicole Helm has written called The Carsons and Delaney's. And I didn't realize that 2 of the characters that play a substantial role in this book, and it's the second book in the Battle-Tested series, show up in the last book of just the Carsons and Delaney series. I didn't realize that you had to read that entire series before you read this one. So I just felt like I was late to the party, that there was something that was happening, that something, like, obviously stuff had gone on before in other books that were alluded to that were not discussed in this book. Now, if it was book number 1 and I went ahead and read book number 2, if it was book number 1 that all this stuff happened in, I could have forgiven it and said, okay, that's my bad. I should have absolutely read the first book in this series first before diving into book 2. But because it was part of a completely different series, I'm a little annoyed about it, to be completely honest. And that's why it didn't get a 4-star rating from me. Outside of that, though, I mean, you're not completely lost. It's not like huge chunks of the plot rely on you knowing what happened in that last book of that other series. But it would kind of make things a little bit more clear, I'm assuming. So the premise of this story, it's about Vanessa and Dylan. And Vanessa and Dylan are, she is a Carson, he is a Delaney. And they are like the Hatfields and McCoys kind of an idea, where these 2 families for generations have not gotten along and blah, blah, blah. And then one day, or it's actually at one of these other characters' weddings, that, I don't want to give away too much, that they end up drunkenly hooking up. And of course, as happens in every romance novel, she gets pregnant. So now it's 3 months later and she has come to tell him. And while she's at the bank, because he is the son of the bank owner, so he works at the bank, there's a robbery and both of them are kidnapped, and then they are being held at this cabin where most of the story ends up taking place. So that's pretty much the premise of the story. I don't want to talk too much more on it other than that. What I did like about this one was that, much like the other book that I was talking about, much like the Blaze book I was talking about, this one flipped the script a little bit with the atypical, it would be a bad boy and a good girl, whereas she was the quote-unquote bad girl and he was the good boy. When you come in terms of caricatures, if you will, she, you know, her family seems to be the rough and tumble. They're part of a motorcycle gang. She runs a car repair shop. She's abrasive, she's loud, she swears, whereas he's from the very upstanding family. You know, they own the bank, and he did this and went to college, and blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean? So it was kind of interesting that what would be atypical for a romance novel was actually flipped. And I did also find her to be a little too abrasive in some instances. She was hostile a lot of the time. I mean, okay, if I was being held in a secluded cabin in the wilderness with some guy I didn't particularly like, yeah, I'd be a little hostile too. But she was a little extra hostile towards Dylan. I mean, I could see her being hostile towards their captors, but she was very, very hostile and abrasive to him. He was trying to help, and he was trying to figure things out, and she would kind of fight him a lot of the time. And he was just looking out for her best interest and their child, right? So, yeah. But outside of it, was a good story. Nicole Helm is a really great author. I do plan on going back to read the first book, and then there's still 2 more books in the series that are due to come out, or they've already come out, or one's come out and the other one's due to come out. And I do want to go back and read the original Carson's and Delaney series, because I think that one will be really good as well. Anyway, guys, that is all that I have for this video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. I will put my bingo card up here just to kind of show you guys where I am this week. That last book that I read was for the Summer Romance Book Bingo. That was for the prompt of read a book published in 2019. So here's my current bingo card. I've only got 4 spots covered, but as you guys know, my goal is 8 books each month and 9 books in the last month in August. If you are unfamiliar with what the Summer Romance Book Bingo is, I highly recommend. I will leave a link to my video in the description box below announcing it. It runs June, July, and August this year. You can join it anytime. There are prizes, so please do go ahead and check that out. And yeah, and anyway, that's all I have, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below, what was your favorite book that you read this month? Or have you read any of these books, and what did you think about them? And until my next video, everybody, take care and happy reading. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye, guys.